Hello and welcome to the Emotion at Work podcast, where we place emotion at the heart of the people, the processes and the place of work. Today we're focusing on the place of work. It's often overlooked and something that we've looked into in the past on the Emotion at Work podcast on episode, I think it was 23 with Monica Parker. And I think the workplace is something that impacts how people feel, and then that will impact how they think, which I find really fascinating, because in places like retail or maybe hospitality, a huge amount of effort is invested, or effort and money actually, is invested into looking into how the place impacts the customers that may be in there, or the clientele that may be in there. And I don't think, or it doesn't feel to me anyway, like this similar level of investment or interest is taken into the place of work and how that can impact how people feel and therefore how they think. And you also know, as fair listener, that the Emotion at Work podcast loves a bit of evidence-based practice in what we do. And so I'm delighted that our guest has chosen to join us today. As a leading academic who spent over 20 years working in organizations, our guest is an internationally renowned expert on work and the workplace. They're the MBA Director and Assistant Professor of Organizational Behavior at Bond University. Also, they're a leading thinker on the understanding of the future of work and how we can reimagine work to live more meaningful and creative lives. I mean, what an introduction is that? So let's welcome to the Emotion at Work podcast, Libby Sander. Hi, Libby.
Hi, Phil. It's great to be here. I don't know if I can live up to that, but it sounded good.
Well, based on our conversations that we've had off air, I'm absolutely sure that you can. So no, I think it's going to be really good. I'm really looking forward to today. And as always, we begin with our innocuous yet unexpected question. So my innocuous yet unexpected question for you is, what is a feel-good film for you?
Oh, I'm the worst with films. I tend to just watch documentaries all of the time. And so, look, a little bit in the vein of what we're going to talk about today, Phil.
Yeah, go on.
I have to say, one of my favourite ever TV shows is Silicon Valley. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
No, I've heard of it, but I've not seen it, no.
Super, super funny. Yeah, so I would have to say that would be one of my favourite.
Okay, and is it the satirical element in particular that that kind of makes it one of your favourite things?
Yeah, the sad thing is it's not even actually that satirical. It's pretty much exactly what happens in organizations in startup. Let's be real, like we saw with The Office. Yeah, so it's very, very probably a bit too true to be funny in some cases, but hilarious.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good. So my feel good, so one of my feel good movies, or a lot of my feel good movies actually, kind of remind me of family stuff. So one of my feel good movies that I could watch again and again and again is Disney's Tangled. I love the slapstick comedy in it. I love the score in it. I think the score in it is fabulous. And I love the slight reinterpretation of that kind of classic Rapunzel story. So, yeah, and there's one scene in particular that I could just sit and watch every time. It makes me cry every time. It's lovely. So, yeah, Tangled for me.
I haven't watched that. My kids are 14 and 16 now, so 2 boys. So I should might have to have a look.
Yeah. I think also. So my 3 are. What are they now? 17, nearly 14 and nearly 11. So they're less keen on watching Tangled with me, but I don't care. It's fine. So we have like a regular ritual where we do a family movie night, and then the choice of movie alternates from one person to the next. And there are 2 rules, which are, one is it can't be Star Wars, because if it was Star Wars, I could just choose that every week. Yeah. And the second one is it can't be Marvel. They've been instilled by 2 different members of the family. So often we kind of go to animation-y stuff. What do we watch on the weekend? I think it was Luca, which was another Disney one, but set in Italy. So that was good fun. So, yeah.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, it's good.
Very cool.
Okay. So Silicon Valley then, a little bit true to life, or too true to life maybe.
Probably not feel good when we be honest about it, but it's funny, yeah.
Well, as long as it makes you feel good, that's fine. That's what works. That was what we're after. Yeah, definitely. And do you see some overlaps then in between kind of what you see in that particular show and your research and what you've kind of looked into in the workplace and how people's reactions to the physical work environment? Do you notice any overlap between the two?
Yeah, absolutely, because there's a whole, quite a few different scenes and different episodes where, they've got funding for their startup and then they're building an office to look something like Google, and does that actually have any scientific effect? Should we have a slippery slide in our office? And they end up with all kinds of, weird and wonderful inventions to try and make them more creative or more innovative and to get the startup to launch to the moon, become a unicorn. So, yeah, there are definitely some parallels there for sure.
And should we have a... I'm sorry.
One of the guys starts out working actually at it's supposed to be Google, really, called Hooli, and, they spend months just coming up with a potato cannon, in terms of silly workplace ideas that, people get put on projects that don't matter. So, yeah, there's the potato cannon. Haven't had one of those in real life, though, yet.
No, I didn't even know potato cannon was a thing.
You'll have to watch it now.
I'll have to watch it now. Yeah, I definitely will. And I suppose then I'm left with two maybe slightly, slightly tongue-in-cheek questions. And one is, should an office have a slide in then? So you said, you talked about the slippery slide. So is there evidence to suggest offices should have slippery slides in them?
Not unless you're a kindergarten, perhaps, or you're running a series of kindergartens. I don't know. Maybe at Google, but for most of us, I think that's the problem. We see all these images and think, oh, that's what a good office should be like. And for most of us, it's nowhere near what we actually need. And so I would say no, definitely no. To the slide, no.
And then the potato cannon?
Well, actually, most of us aren't very creative at work, so who knows? That could help with team cohesion. It might help with, a bit of humour, creativity, but I don't think it's going to produce anything useful, no. Okay.
All right. Well, let's get into what might produce or what does produce some really useful outcomes for the workplace then, because I really enjoyed your 2019 paper, which is called Perceptions Matter: The Reactions to the Physical Work Environment. And what prompted you to do that piece of research? Because when I was reading it, it felt like this was something that you really, really wanted to research. It wasn't like, this might be funky to look into. It felt like it was something that you really, really wanted to get into. So what prompted you to want to do that particular piece of research?
So I'd been working in industry for quite a long time, and I'd often been tasked with designing offices and saying, how do we make the workplace better? It doesn't make any difference if we just have grey plants and, well, maybe not grey, maybe dead, grey cubicles, grey carpet, fluorescent lighting. Does it make any difference? And there wasn't a lot of research that looked at the entire workplace, which seems quite strange. So plenty of research on the effect that plants have on us, plenty of research on knowing what kind of lighting does for us, air quality.
Okay.
But when you walk into an office, you don't just react to a plant or to the lighting or to the, lack of open space or too much open space. And there wasn't really any research that looked at the environment as a whole, because you're going to walk in and you're going to react consciously, unconsciously to that. So that actually formed the basis of my PhD research, to figure out, well, what are the most important reactions psychologically that people need from their workplace? And there really wasn't anything to assess that. Okay.
And how did you go about assessing that then? If that sounds like a massive question, but is that okay?
I'm going to bore you to death with the excruciating detail that goes into a PhD thesis. But in a nutshell, essentially what we did, what I did initially, was look at, what are the most important things we need to be thinking about? And so one of those was a cognitive reaction. Okay, so as knowledge workers in an office environment, what is the cognitive reaction that we actually need? So I developed a measure to assess these responses that people actually have. And so the most important cognitive reaction that we need in the modern workplace is, it's not, will be no surprise to your listeners, focus and concentration. But how many of us can actually do that in a modern open plan office? Because I'm sure you've heard, maybe you've experienced, the number one complaint in an open plan office is just, can everyone be quiet? Stop talking on the phone, stop doing Zoom meetings in an open office with no headphones on. I actually had that last week with somebody. And so the cognitive is one of the first reactions. The second one is an affective or an emotional reaction, which, of course, you know, is something I know you're very, very interested in. And this is the one that often gets quite, I think, forgotten about, because, of course, it makes sense. We need the cognitive reaction of focus and concentration. But what about this affect thing? Like, really? Because for a long time, we told people, just don't bring your emotions to work. Could you please leave those alone? We don't really want to know about that. And as you followed so brilliantly through your episodes with your guests, understanding how important emotion is and what role that plays in the workplace. So we looked into, well, what is the most important affective emotional reaction? And quite surprisingly, I think to us initially, it was a sense of beauty. So this is different from what you might think in terms of, well, you know, beauty is quite subjective. You know, I like that painting, I like that person, but it is, I guess, a little bit more visceral than that. It's this unconscious reaction. It's a fundamental human need. And anyone that's walked into, very inspiring architecture, if you've been out in nature, I think, we have this reaction that we feel, this sense of beauty. And that is actually really important. It's correlated with increasing our mood. And mood, we know, has a positive mood and negative mood as well, has a range of outcomes that are very important in the workplace, and the negative ones, the ones you want to avoid. And so that was really, really interesting. I think that took a while to really get people to understand that, well, can't you just make grey cubicles? And we're seeing a change now, of course, even in our urban landscapes in terms of, natural materials, the use of biophilia, that we're designing for beautiful places that people want to be in. And as you said, we've been doing it in environmental psychology, in retail for a long time. We want to get you to come into the store. We want to get you to stay as long as possible. And we want to get you to spend as much money as possible. And so the engineering of those environments has been in place for a really long time. If you look at an Apple store, it's designed for all of the senses. It is specifically engineered in a particular way to make you have a particular emotional experience. And, you think of another store where it might be the opposite and you think, I just can't wait to get out of this place. But we've been really slow at applying, to the workplace. And so the sense of beauty is the second reaction, the emotional one. And then the third one was a relational reaction, which is connectedness, but not the, could you all come on Friday and let's all have a pizza party and be forced to watch a movie together? Because as we've seen since the pandemic, nobody really wants that, do they? Well, I don't know many people that like the idea of being forced to go to the office and watch a movie.
No, a bit of forced fun is something that it just is always the antithesis of that thing. When somebody's saying, right, go do this thing because this is going to be fun. I rarely meet a team or a group of people that all go, yes, that was actually fun, thanks. Yeah,
I really want to do that. Yeah. So it's about being able to connect when you choose to. And I think that's the key point. So how can we create a workplace that then facilitates these reactions? One, that you can think and concentrate when you need to. Another one, that you can connect with people and you can collaborate and you can do all of those things when you need to. And then I guess underpinning all of that is this sense of beauty that's inherently built into the entire workplace, because the workplace is a physical scaffold. It's a cognitive scaffold for our brain. So we're always picking up messages. If you're in a place with a concrete floor, architects love those. They're really awful. As humans, we don't like concrete. Have a very restricted, kind of constricted reaction. Low ceilings also do that. It's like a threat response. And that will make you feel very different if you're in a space that has beautiful natural light and views of nature and high ceilings, natural materials. So, even if you don't have to know the science just to know I know how I feel when I go into this space. Does it make me feel good? Does it make me feel calm? Does it make me feel inspired or creative? Or does it make me feel angry or threatened or like I just can't wait to get out of here?
Yeah, I remember there was so I spent sort of 3 days a week working for a company in their, what they call their support office. It's like their head office. And it had loads of light, loads and loads of light, which at times brought with it its own challenges around kind of comfort and heat, because the amount of glass meant that the office could be quite hot sometimes. But the glass was kind of set in these big, I don't know, big pillars or big columns, I suppose, of grey concrete. And so you had this kind of, I always find it interesting. You had this contrast of these I don't know, must have been 8-10 meter high and 2-3 meter wide kind of pieces of glass that gave you views outside. And what was outside was, the office was set in some grounds, so you had some grass spaces outside, you had some trees, you had some greenery outside of it, and then it was almost kind of set in a real contrast then to these really big, thick pillars of grey concrete. And it was what you described as well, was the epitome of the big open plan offices. So you could have banks of 20 desks, and then you'd have 10 rows or 10 banks of 20 desks, kind of in a row. And then you had a meeting room in the middle of the office, which I've got a separate story which I'll tell in a minute. We had a meeting room in the middle of the office which is completely glass. So even if you went into a meeting in the middle of the office, then everyone outside could see. Was it completely glass? No, three sides of glass. Yeah, you're like a fishbowl in the middle. To the point where one day I was doing some strategy work or strategy thinking, and I was trying to come up with a framework to hang together these different elements we've been working on. And I got asked to stop. Somebody came over and knocked on the door and said, "You're really distracting everybody, because you've got scissors and you've got sellotape and you've got like colored pens and you've got, you're playing some music. All right, it's not very loud, but you're still, doing all of these things. And you're just distracting everybody else." And I was like, "Oh, okay, I'm sorry." And I thought, right, well, clearly if I want to do my creative thinking stuff, then I need to do it somewhere else that's not in the office. Yeah.
Sounds hideous. The whole office is like a complete nightmare.
It wasn't great. It wasn't great. I can't remember where I was going to go with that now. Anyway, so I think I was sharing it because I can. You asked, you at the start, you said you might have experienced these things, and I was thinking, yes, actually, I did, and it was just that kind of memory came back. So when we think about the three different reactions then, so the cognitive, affective, and relational, can I work my way backwards through them if that's okay? So on the relational reaction, you talked about that being connectedness, and you made that additional distinction then around that being connectedness when you choose to. So could you tell me a bit more about that? And then I'll move in, and then I'll probably ask you a follow-up question around, so how can we help that then? So if the listeners are in the kind of, they're listening to this thinking about their office or their workspace that they might be in, what might they be able to do? So so let's do, so the connectedness when you choose to. Yeah, could you tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah, I think often we feel like, there's a lot of focus, especially after the pandemic and, the change to working from home and hybrid, that you have to connect, right? Whether it be like we are right now, online, the online meeting, everyone's so, traumatized with the on Zoom meeting, aren't they? Or, you have to make that effort, go to the office in the hybrid model, and you should be connecting all day with your team. And there's too much focus on what we call the synchronous work, and that is what has to get done with everyone else at the same time as everyone else, versus, asynchronous, where you're working on your own. And that is actually a big piece of most modern knowledge workers' jobs. And we sort of forget about that because we think, well, you've got to be talking to each other all day. And I think that's definitely a mistake. And each team will have its own rhythm, its own dynamic in terms of what's right for them and what they need for the particular project or the task at hand. And so giving people that choice in the way we design work is really important. And then by, following from that, how we design the work environment. So, what can employers do? It's a little bit trickier sometimes for employees to do this, but providing a range of spaces that give people flexibility about the type of work that they need focusing on, and how they might like to, connect and meet. It sounds silly because often it's just, well, you're either at your team desk or you're in the cafe area. And in fact, that's not always the ideal place to connect either, because it might be too noisy. It could, it doesn't have whiteboards. It might not have the things you might want to use. Like you just talked about the meeting room, that was the fishbowl, but that wasn't ideal because everyone was looking at you and told you to stop while you were trying to be creative. So I think it really is thinking about, and for me, a lot of this conversation about how work is changing is thinking about the psychological state that we need to be in. And so if we need to connect, what spaces are we going to be able to use that will support that? And it doesn't have to be sitting down. It doesn't have to be in the fishbowl meeting room. Walking meetings increase creativity by 81%. I know there's a CEO of a big Australian company here, Lend-Lease, who takes most of her meetings walking. So that changes the dynamic. It's good for our health as well. So it's really about thinking differently about, give people a choice to connect. Don't say you must be sitting with your team all of the time. You must be immediately interrupting each other and bouncing ideas, because that's going to have a huge effect on the cognitive reaction when you get to that one. I can talk more about what happens when we force people to connect too much all the time.
Okay. Wonderful. Okay. So for the listener then, it's maybe thinking, all right, well, within the environments that I work in, or my teams work in, or my organizations work in, how might I have a range of spaces for different types of work which encourage those different reactions? So if we want to have a space where people connect, those connections could be on a one-to-one basis. So you might want somewhere that, I don't know, might have a bit of privacy with it. So if I run the risk of sounding like I'm just going to insult the organization that I was describing earlier on, but they basically had what you described. There was desks or canteen or offices or meeting rooms, sorry, and the amount of one-to-ones that would happen on tables in the canteen. And then some days it would just get so noisy down there because you had so many people. It was like a I don't know, like flamingos, when a load of flamingos come together and they start to make a load of noise, it sounds a bit like a cocktail party. But also you had very little privacy then, so people could walk past and would naturally overhear snippets of discussion and snippets of conversation. So I suppose, would that connectedness relate to maybe more one-on-one type connection, and then maybe, I don't know, small group connection and then bigger group connection? So would you potentially have, again, I don't want to presuppose that everyone's got enough physical space to do this, but would you have different types of connected areas for different types of connection, ideally? Yeah,
absolutely. And I think the exciting thing is now with the change in our urban landscapes as well, is you don't have to do all of this in the office. You just raised a really good point about overhearing other people's conversations. And so when you're in the office, your brain is always attending to the conversations around you, even if you don't want it to. And the reason for that is because it might be about you, or it might be something you need to know. And so unconsciously, you're trying to get on with your job there, and your brain is listening, thinking, something happening over there I need to know. When you go to a coffee shop, it can be, that buzz, bit of background noise, that hum. So it can be, noisy, but the conversation's unlikely to be about you, and it's unlikely to be about what you need to know. So a low level of noise is actually good for creativity, but it depends on the type of noise that it is. So in the office, in the environment you described, it isn't good. So getting out of the office is great. Yeah. Go to a coffee shop, go and have a one-on-one meeting. At the Met in New York, it's regularly used as a co-working space, which I think is fantastic. I mean, we could talk for ages about the cognitive scaffold of that particular architecture in terms of creativity and innovation. So, you know, I think this idea that work is distributed, it happens everywhere now. So get out of the office, get out of your house, you know, go and find spaces that are going to make you feel supported in the task that you're trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think, so one of the, I love a walking meeting that you mentioned earlier on. I think I first started using walking meetings back in 2008. I think I first started doing like walking one-to-ones with my team, just because I found that we achieved more. And we had better conversations out walking than we did together. And I feel like there's something. I feel like there's the symbolic nature of being beside somebody rather than being opposite somebody. And I think often when you, or at least when I used to do one-to-one in a small meeting room, you'd be sat kind of opposite sides of a desk, and then there is that potential feeling of opposition. Whereas when we're out walking together, we're literally together, we're side by side, you know, and it also takes away that potential feeling of scrutiny. So if you ask someone a question and they're doing some thinking and you're sat opposite them, then there's that, I don't know, potentially felt psychological pressure of, oh, I need to answer quickly, or I need to control my behavior so that somebody doesn't misinterpret what I'm doing. Whereas I think if you're next to somebody and you're already moving, if there's a bit of a pause, the level of felt scrutiny from the person who's doing the thinking is less, because they can't see all of you, you know, in that way. And I do get interested in terms of when people slow down. When I ask them a question and their pace slows down, I'm like, oh, they're really thinking about this one. Then this is taking some cognitive effort to do, and then we'll pick up the pace again, maybe when the thinking's finished. And where I'm going, I think, then is, so from a workplace point of view. So Emotional Work is a relatively small company, so we're 5 employees strong, and we're spread all over the country. So we are 100% remote. You know, we don't have any physical spaces that we work in, and what we do is make sure that we invest with our employees in terms of getting the right setup for them at home. So making sure they've got the right kit, they've got the right equipment, they're ergonomically done in the right way. But we also then will cover costs of, so if somebody wants a day pass for a co-working space to go there because there's a particular environment they like to work in, then we'll do that. You know, we encourage them to go out for a walk and to do their thinking out and about, rather than doing it sat at a desk, and using different spaces for different purposes. And then we have some money set aside to cover that, because we think it's important. I don't want to sit at my desk all day. Why would I want to try and tether somebody else to their desk all day? So I think
it doesn't work, because you have to do all these different types of work, as you said, and the idea that any one space is going to support all of these different needs we have during the day is just silly, frankly.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so that's the relational reaction then. So let's do the affective reaction. And I think the listener might have been surprised by your the way that you took it on to being about the sense of beauty, because I think historically I would have thought that you want the affective reaction to be like a named emotion. So say, you want people to be happy, or you want them to be you want them to feel safe, or all those kinds of things. And I love that actually, no, it's about the affective reaction we want is that feeling of a sense of beauty, and then the impact that has on our mood. So could you tell us a bit more about where sense of beauty came from?
It's really interesting when you talk about that, because of course we need our workplaces to be psychologically safe, but we also have this idea, and it's been an age-old discussion in organizational behavior forever about, what comes first, the happy worker and then the satisfied worker, or the productive outcomes, or the other way around. But is it realistic to expect people to be happy all of the time? Because that is literally the satire, isn't it, that we see in the Office TV show. If you watch Silicon Valley, they're the same thing. We're always high-fiving, we're hustling, we're, geeing each other up, and, this is how it has to be. Everyone has to be high energy all the time. And that kind of workplace can become extremely toxic. Yeah. You're very negative today, Phil. You have to be positive all the time. You have to be in a really good mood. And that just isn't the reality. And I think, when I started to look into this, because it's quite an interesting topic, as you said, and it really hasn't been looked at a lot in the workplace at all. A colleague of mine did a study in the US where he looked at what you would call really kind of not spiritual buildings per se, but, very significant buildings. And I'm sure your listeners would be able to relate. When you've been into a building and it just makes you feel, wow, it's like a bit of awe and wonder. And so what he did was use mobile fMRI scanners, so mobile brain scanners, and he just put people into these buildings with the scanner on and looked at, well, what actually happens? And what he found was that just putting them into the building without doing anything else put them into a meditative state, a very mindful state. And when you think about if you've ever tried to meditate, how difficult that is. In 2 seconds, your brain's like, oh, did I turn the oven off? What do I have to do after work today? Right. Yep. And we go and do these courses, we go off on retreats with yogi gurus and we try to learn to meditate. But just putting people in a certain type of building and environment actually will have that effect on your brain. And so this idea of the scaffolding of the physical environment, the neuroarchitecture, is extremely significant, and we're just starting to really understand this now, and particularly in the workplace. And so when you have this sense of beauty, you can feel things like maybe not as much awe and wonder in the workplace unless you work somewhere pretty fantastic. But certainly, it can produce positive mood. It can make you feel calmer. It can make you feel more creative and more inspired. And, it's logical as well. When you think about our houses, how much money do we spend? Look at all the reality TV show channels now on, redesigning homes and, changing them and all of those sorts of things. We spend a lot of time making our houses a place where we want to be that make us feel good. Not many people have grey carpets and, well, maybe they have scented plants. They don't have these sterile, very austere environments, because we want to feel physically and psychologically comfortable. That's what we need in a workplace. And so if it's ugly and if it kind of repels you, it's not going to have that effect. And so it makes sense. You go into a place and there is, detail, and there is interest, and there are things that spark curiosity. And we can get down into, obviously, materials that you might use in terms of construction, views, lights, nature, all of those sorts of things. But beauty is a fundamental human reaction that we all need. And so it's sort of strange that, we're seeing it much more now in workplaces. But going back 10 years or more, it was much, much less of a thing.
Yeah.
Most workplaces were horrible. Couldn't wait to leave at the end of the day.
Or they were built for function rather than feeling, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So this sense of beauty, it's an aesthetic reaction as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe. So I know we've talked quite a bit about knowledge workers and maybe those kind of office spaces. What about for those workplaces maybe where the function is absolutely critical? So I suppose I'm thinking about maybe a garage, or a mechanic's garage, not like a fueling station garage, but where mechanics might work, or like a water treatment, kind of place, or where actually the building does need to fulfill a purpose because it links in with the task that individuals are there to do, and it might give maybe less flexibility in terms of how we might be able to create that sense of beauty and think about how those things might be. So what if any advice might you have for people that might work in that kind of environment?
Well, I think we're seeing this shift as well, because you're right. There are environments that have a particular function. They have a whole range of different requirements in terms of safety and different things. but that doesn't preclude them from embracing these principles. And so if we look at hospital settings, which some of the noisiest workplaces, which has a huge impact on patient recovery, but also on the staff that work there, often very austere and very clinical. And we can see how that design has shifted, particularly over the last 10 years. So you can still retain what are the core functions that we need in terms of that, as you said, functionality and safety and whatever else that might be. But, a study done, quite a while ago now showed that when hospital patients were put into a room that had natural light and views of greenery and was basically a much nicer environment than what a hospital room used to be, that they required 20% less pain medication after surgery, and they recovered much, much more quickly. I think it's just how we're seeing that actually shift in terms of, the changes. So we're seeing a lot more emphasis on this in school environments as well. There's being increasingly research done on the effects of noise in school classrooms. And so if you've been into a classroom recently, you might have seen they look very different to perhaps when, you went to school. In terms of the layout, that functionality to move and change the room so the student is just not sitting at one desk all day listening to the teacher, which isn't really great for learning outcomes. And so, there are numerous examples of this throughout, different settings as well, in factories, same kind of principles as we look at the hospital. If we make the environment more conducive to putting the human at the centre, to having an experience that promotes the kind of psychological states we need for work. If you're working in a factory, you need to concentrate. Still, it can be safety issues if you aren't able to concentrate well. If you're standing on a very, hard floor all day, how can we engineer that environment to produce the outcomes that are going to be better psychologically, physically, and in terms of the performance that we want from employees. And so I think we're seeing a fundamental shift on this, where work is becoming much more life-centred rather than it was always very mechanistic. It was always very system-focused and machine-focused. And if we go back to the origins of job design research decades now, originally it was like, well, Phil, you just make this one widget all day and you keep making a widget. And then we realised, well, that's not great for your motivation. That doesn't do much for you in terms of your satisfaction at work, to just think I'm only making this tiny widget. How can we expand your job to make it more interesting and to incorporate other elements so you can see what that contribution is? And it's a little bit like that with the workplace as well, that we don't just accept anymore, well, that's the way it has to be. An office has to be ugly. It has to be noisy. You just have to sit at that one desk all day. It requires this change in thinking, and then we see dramatically different outcomes supported by the research.
Yeah. Wonderful. And some fantastic examples in there. Thank you. That was really useful. Thank you so much. All right. So let's move into the third set of reactions then, which I guess in a way you touched on just there in your example of retaining kind of focus. If I'm just doing a single widget all day, that repetitiveness might then get boring for me, so therefore I get distracted and think about different things, and the quality of my work might go down, or the productivity of my work might go down. Tell me a bit more about the cognitive reactions, and again, what can our listeners learn or take from what you found?
Yeah, so I don't think it's any surprise to anybody listening that you need to be able to concentrate and focus as the most important work reaction. But what people don't realise is that firstly, you don't habituate to noise. So people often think, oh, well, you just get used to it. But actually you don't. So we did research in the lab here at my university where we showed a causal link between standard open plan office noise, so not even particularly loud, and then we objectively measured people's physiological stress. So we measured galvanic skin response, which is your sweat response. It shows how stressed you are. We measured heart rate and heart rate variability. And what we found was there is this causal link between the office noise and your stress response, to the tune where your stress went up by 34% and it made you in a 25% worse mood. So if you think about that in the workplace, if you're going about your job all day in a 34% more stressed state, objectively measured, and you're in a 25% worse mood, that's not a great thing for you. It's not a great thing for your workplace and for your employer. So, not at all. When people can't focus and concentrate, then there are other reactions that flow from that. So what happens is that, and this is why open plan offices that are poorly designed don't work, because the original idea was, let's just shove everyone together. They'll be really creative. They'll be more innovative. They'll collaborate and problem solve, and they'll, get to know each other better and meet new people. And actually none of those things happen in a poorly designed open plan office. And what does happen is that people get more withdrawn. They don't collaborate more. They collaborate less. And they can even become hostile to their colleagues. Because when you just can't actually concentrate to get your job done, then, everything else becomes a nice to have. And so it has this flow-on effect across the other scales in terms of, well, are you in a good mood? Are you connecting with other people? No, you're not. You're just incredibly frustrated that you can't get your job.
Yeah, I can imagine how that goes on to impact that relational reaction, and also the effective reaction as well. Because I think one of my favorite questions to ask people when I often let me try that one again. Often I get asked to work with teams or with organizations in terms of how do we think about how we feel. And one of my favorite questions to ask is, what's got in your way recently? So what's been, and then a variation of that might be what barriers do you experience, or it might be what do you find yourself kind of banging up against or hitting, in when you're trying to get your job done. Because those things and that links to the emotion of anger then, because anger as an emotion is about trying to get over an obstacle to achieve a goal. So there's a goal I want to be productive, I want to complete this task, I want to connect with my colleagues, I want to experience the great feelings of working in whatever setting I'm in, and then what happens is things get in the way. And then if I keep sort of hitting up against or running into these different barriers, I think that the level of frustration can grow and grow and grow, and to the point then where I'm just grumpy. I'm just in a grumpy mood because all these things are in my way, and I can't do anything about it to change them, because I can't shout everybody just be quiet, or I can't maybe take myself off, because then I might be seen as not wanting to be part of the team. So it was really interesting. One team I was working with recently, a member of the team goes and sits in a different part of the office regularly, because that's where they go to complete a particular style of work that they want to do. And the team took great offense to that. They were like, well, you'd rather be over there than you'd be here. Why would you rather be away from us than be with us? And so, well, it's nothing to the part of the discussion I had with the team afterwards, as I was kind of reviewing my findings. They said, the individual said, it's nothing to do with you. Like, I really like you all. I enjoy being around you all. When I've got this particular type of work to do, though, I find it really difficult to do it sat at my desk. So I go and sit in this other part of the office, and I go and do it over there because that's where it works best for me. But the team had made it mean something. They'd made it mean that the individual was disengaged, or didn't want to be part of the team, or was and being actively resistant. Whereas not, it's actually I just want to get my job done, and that particular task that I'm doing, I find I get best done over there. So it's a really interesting discussion with the team in terms of, like I said, what they were making it mean.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, coming back to, that's why people like to have the hybrid days at home, because they don't get interrupted visually or auditorily, and they can actually not get things done. So having the flexibility to do that is so important.
Okay. So I'd like to move into maybe some quick fire questions on, so what do we get wrong? What do we need to avoid? And what can we do to make it better? So what would be your kind of most, what maybe your three most common things that, organizations or teams or workplaces get wrong in terms of their design, and then how that makes people think, feel, or connect?
So I think there's still too much focus on let's have acres of open plan space without enough barriers or things that will break up that space, not just from an acoustic perspective, but just a visual perspective, that people, we like to feel cozy. We like to feel, that we can achieve some level of sort of comfort or privacy. The second big thing would be acoustics. They can be, quite expensive. And often we get to that point in the project and then someone says, well, we spend how much on acoustics? Let's just put a big line through that. And then you end up with a workplace that nobody can do anything in. And I've been in plenty of those. So acoustics are so important. And, we need to bring them in from the start. If we're designing a new workspace, if we're retrofitting a space, then get an expert in to look at that, because it makes an incredible difference. The most distracting type of noise at work is multi-talker speech. And there are so many things that can be done with soundscaping or acoustic treatment that will reduce that speech transmission index, right? Which is how far those voices are going to carry before they interrupt somebody. So there's a lot that can be done now from that perspective. And I would say that is, just an imperative, because as organisations are shrinking their workspaces because of the hybrid model in a lot of cases, what that means is you have potentially a smaller workspace, obviously, because not everyone's coming in every day, but then it's noisier, because you haven't still got, as much room, and there probably hasn't been this thought on the acoustics, and there's much more focus on collaboration. So it's like, well, let's have all these cafe spaces and social spaces, but hang on, people still need to actually concentrate. They're not only going to come in on the days they're in the office to, collaborate and catch up. Yeah. They need to actually be able to do graded work as well. And so we can't forget about that. So I would say those two things are there's a lot, but they're very important.
Okay. Wonderful. And what was the name of the index? You said there was an index that carries, that measures how fast.
So how far your speech actually carries before you interrupt somebody else.
I love that there's an index for that. Yeah. I love that. I love that there's an index for that. Okay. What should we avoid then? So if we, if the listener is thinking about their workplace or looking around the environment that they're in, what should they avoid?
So I think there is no one size fits all, and it always goes wrong when we try to make something think, well, that's going to fit everyone. Everyone doesn't mind having a hot desk. Everybody will be able to deal with this. Everyone needs to come into the office 3 days a week or 5 days a week, and that isn't true. So understand we need to design around who are the people who are in the space and working for you, with you. What kind of work are they doing? And how does that change throughout the course of the day in terms of what are their needs during the course of the day? So we want to avoid stereotyping. We want to avoid assuming that if something works for you, it's going to work for somebody else. And that goes with space and everything else. So you might read something if you're designing your own space at home and think, well, that's what all the experts say should work, but it might not work for you. Some people can work really well in a noisy, buzzy space because they might have a particular personality style or type of work that supports that, and other people, literally cannot think. And so it's really understanding, knowing yourself, knowing the type of work that you do, and then what type of workspace is going to support that.
Okay.
And because we have so much variation now with spaces available in a city, as you said, co-working spaces, work from home, it doesn't mean you have to provide all those spaces in your own workplace, but it's providing access to different types of spaces and flexibility for people to use those.
Yeah. And I think that's I guess, so that point you're making there about there being a degree of agency that individuals within organizations can take to say, right, actually, these are the kind of environments that work for me, so I'm going to find a way to access those. And it not necessarily being always about the organization having to put those, can't think of a better phrase than put on, or to make available those places or spaces. So, yeah. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. And then, if there were, so recognizing that there is no one size fits all, and that workplaces, spaces, the types of organizations, types of work, types of people, all of which will be different. So it might be that I'm asking an unfair question now. And if it is, you can say, Phil, that's an unfair question. I can't answer that. If there were, I don't know, 3 things, maybe up to 3, more than 3 if you like as well, that somebody could do today that could make their work spaces or workplaces better for people in terms of whether that be their cognitive reactions, affective reactions, or relational reactions, what might those things be?
Yeah. So we can't all go and hire architects and build a whole new building, but on a personal level, I know it's probably been said a million times, but honestly, go and get some really nice plants.
Okay.
Just 40 seconds of looking at a greenery or green roof has significant restorative effects on our cognitive function. So buy some plants for your desk, go outside and look at greenery regularly during the workday if you can't buy plants or you don't like them or you think they're going to die. Just go outside, even if the weather's bad. Just go outside and look at greenery. It is a huge effect. The second one would be clean up your desk. Okay, so clutter is great for creativity. It actually encourages your brain to think outside of the box because it looks at the space and goes, oh my gosh, things are already chaotic here. There's obviously no rules. I can make it up as I go along. But when we're not doing creative work, it's actually very draining for our brain. Because you're trying to do something and your brain's unconsciously going, oh, look at that pile over there. I didn't get to that yet. Gosh, that's annoying. I want to clean that up. I've written an article about this that we can link in the show notes if you like.
Please,
for listeners. It actually has negative effects on your what your co-workers think of you. You might not get promoted because they think you're disorganized and kind of don't know what you're doing if you've got a messy desk. So cleaning up your desk is very important. And probably the third one would be, again, things that we all know but don't do is drink more water. Don't sit down all day. Move around more. It will restore your brain. It will make you more creative. It will have, obviously good benefits for your health. It will put you in a better mood. But we do. And don't eat lunch at your desk. So we can link another article that I wrote that showed that the average work desk is actually dirtier than the toilet seat in your office, because they don't get cleaned that much and people eat at their desk, which is not a great thing if people are listening to this over breakfast or dinner. Apologies for that. But yes, don't eat your desk and clean it because probably no one else is cleaning it. So yeah, I would encourage that.
Definitely. I think the paper you're referring to, which I really enjoy reading papers that have amazing titles. And so I think the paper was "Get a Proper Chair, Don't Eat Your Desk, and No Phones in the Loo: How to Keep Your Home Workspace Safe and Hygienic." I was like, I didn't get to read the paper, but just the title itself was like, yeah, that just looks amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can definitely put links to that in the show notes.
You're going to be a lot happier.
Yeah. Okay then. So as we start to come towards the end of the podcast, then we'll move into our kind of our final section. I think the journey we've been on through thinking about the environment as a whole, the different types of reactions, so the cognitive, affective, and relational reactions, and what I've really loved, Libby, is how you've just kind of interspersed really practical examples and suggestions and hints and tips all the way through. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing your thinking so far. I think it's been really, really helpful. As Dr. Libby Sander has so brilliantly outlined, the places we work create those affective reactions. Emotion at work. Being able to express all emotion in a constructive way in the physical or virtual place of work is an ongoing challenge facing workplaces all over. If people in your workplace feel unsafe, uninspired, or unsure, if they can share how they feel, get in touch now on hello@emotionatwork.co.uk. Our unique approach of analysis, advice, and application enables you to get to the heart of the matter with our investigative eye, curious mind, providing insight often otherwise unavailable. With concise blueprints, precise measurement, and formative facilitation, working together, we deliver outcomes which last. If that sounds like something you're interested in, contact us now on hello@emotionatwork.co.uk. And for now, back to the episode. Okay. All right, then. So my final couple of questions then, Libby, if that's okay, is looking back now, what has surprised you about your research and your practice in this area?
Just how much interest there is in it. Every time I write an article, I'm often doing radio and TV interviews. I suppose it's always been interesting to me, and there was a level of interest for sure before the pandemic. But since the pandemic, I think what surprised me is just how much interest there is and how sustained that is. It just doesn't go away. I wrote an article on clutter for Harvard Business Review, and it just continues to be a topic every year. You can guarantee that someone's going to have you on to talk about that on radio because we often not good at changing as humans. So I think we spend, a third of our lives at work, and it often is very under-examined from the average person's perspective, outside of these nerdy academics who are sitting in rooms looking at this stuff. There's a lot of talk about productivity, about sleep, about anxiety and mental health. That's sort of forefront for us all of the time, little things we can do to make life and our health better. But we forget there's this huge chunk of a third of our life that we're spending at work. And what can we actually do there to make it better? Are we just destined to kind of have to go in there every day and put up with this narcissistic boss or the, grey cubicles and this terrible workspace? And in fact, there's a lot that can be done and that we can do ourselves to improve our experience of work and, therefore our enjoyment of life.
Oh, wonderful. That was beautifully said. Thank you so much. Okay. Is there someone that you would recommend that we seek out to get on the podcast? So having, I guess, now been a guest, is there someone that you think, oh, you know what, I think this would be someone who would be really interesting for the audience to listen to?
About the workspace specifically?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the colleague I was mentioning in the US, Julio Bermudez, he is the one who did that research at MRI. And I just think it's really groundbreaking, the neuroarchitecture lens that he's taking to that and really bringing the evidence-based angle to it. And he's gone on to do some other really interesting things. So I think it's fascinating to understand more about, how does the building make us feel awe? What actually happens to make us feel, these kind of emotions of wonder and, mindfulness.
Wonderful.
I think it's fascinating. Yeah.
Fabulous. Thank you. Well, so we'll put a link to Julio's paper in the show notes, and then we can pick up his contact details from there. So that's grand. Thank you so much. And if our listeners wanted to ask you something more, what would be a good way for them to get hold of you?
Yeah, so they can find me on LinkedIn, Libby Sander, my website, libbysander.com, and then you can find my links to social on my website as well, and on Substack. Fabulous. So I write over there, so on a range of different topics as well. So
fabulous, wonderful. Well, we'll put links to all of those in the show notes as well. And then my final question then, Libby, is there something else or something more that you are thinking, feeling, or would like to say?
I think the thing that I'm really passionate about is, seeing things like the work that you're doing, Phil, and bringing awareness to these issues. So it's something I'm really passionate about, and I think you've explored it. It's a fantastic question. So no, I don't have anything else to add at this point. Thank you very much for having me on.
Oh, no, thank you for coming on. It's been wonderful to have you. So thank you very much. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Emotional Work Podcast, and we'll see you soon.